All right, I need you to just picture this. Phoenix, Arizona, in the early 1990s. Imagine a city sprawling outwards into the vast, unforgiving Sonoran Desert. The sun beats down relentlessly, and the landscape is a stark mix of saguaro cacti, dusty plains, and distant, rugged mountains. It's a place where urban life meets wild, desolate spaces. Spaces where things and people can disappear with horrifying ease. In this seemingly ordinary desert landscape, a chilling nightmare was about to begin, leaving an indelible mark on the community and terrifying investigators for decades. The first horror struck in September 1993. The victim was 22-year-old Angela Brosso. Her body was discovered in a remote desert field, a scene of unspeakable brutality. She had been brutally stabbed multiple times, and then, in a deeply disturbing act of post-mortem mutilation, she was decapitated. The sheer savagery of the attack sent a wave of shock and revulsion through Phoenix. This wasn't just a murder, it was an act of extreme, almost ritualistic violence that defied comprehension. Who could do such a thing, and why? Just 2 months later, in November 1993, the community's worst fears were confirmed. The body of 17-year-old Melanie Bernas was found in an irrigation canal, not far from where Angela Brosso had been discovered. Again, the scene was horrific. Melanie had been stabbed repeatedly, and the same chilling, disturbing mutilation found on Angela was present. It became horrifyingly clear that a single, extremely violent individual was responsible for both deaths. A phantom killer was stalking the desert shadows of Phoenix, leaving a grotesque signature behind. Police launched massive investigations into both murders, dedicating countless hours to chasing every lead, interviewing countless witnesses, and piecing together the fragmented evidence. But the killer was cunning, leaving little behind beyond the horrifying scene itself. Despite their tireless efforts, the trail went cold. The Phantom Killer, as he became known in hushed tones, simply vanished back into the vastness of the desert, leaving 2 families shattered, 2 horrific mysteries unsolved, and an entire city gripped by a chilling, lingering fear. The nightmare was far from over. It had only just begun its long, silent wait as a monster walked free, unseen, in plain sight. After the horrifying murders of Angela Brosso and Melanie Bernas in late 1993, the desert air of Phoenix seemed to hold its breath. The initial fear was palpable, but as weeks turned into months and months into years, the Phantom Killer vanished, seemingly without a trace. The intense police investigation eventually faded, the active leads exhausted, and the cases settled into the cold, silent files of unsolved mysteries. For the families of Angela and Melanie, however, the nightmare never ended. They lived with the crushing weight of grief, compounded by the agony of not knowing who had stolen their loved ones' lives, or if that monster would ever be brought to justice. Hope dwindled with each passing year, replaced by a quiet, desperate ache. Meanwhile, a revolution was quietly brewing in the world of criminal investigation. Through the late 1990s and early 2000s, DNA technology advanced at an exponential pace. What was once a nascent, experimental tool became the undisputed cornerstone of forensic science. Techniques for extracting and analyzing even minute samples of genetic material became incredibly sophisticated, offering a precision that traditional forensics simply couldn't match. Years, almost 2 full decades, crawled by. But the cold cases of Angela Brosso and Melanie Bernas were never truly forgotten. Periodically, new detectives would take a fresh look, driven by a quiet determination. And then, the opportunity arose. Thanks to these incredible advancements in DNA technology, investigators were able to re-examine crucial pieces of evidence from both crime scenes. From material recovered decades earlier, they successfully extracted a viable DNA profile of the killer. It was a breakthrough that, while long awaited, was almost unbelievable. With the genetic blueprint of their phantom, police uploaded the profile to national DNA databases. This was a long shot, hoping for a direct match. But in the mid-2010s, with the advent of forensic genealogical databases, public DNA services that allow users to upload their genetic data to find relatives, investigators gained a new, powerful weapon. By comparing the killer's DNA to these vast public databases, they could find distant relatives, building a family tree that could eventually lead them back to their suspect. And that's precisely what happened. After 19 agonizing years, the desert finally gave up its secret. The DNA trail, meticulously followed across generations, led to a name: Bryan Patrick Miller. The shock was profound. Bryan Patrick Miller wasn't some shadowy figure living off the grid, hidden away in a remote cave. He was, to all outward appearances, an ordinary man. He had been living openly in the Phoenix area for nearly 2 decades after the murders, working odd jobs, blending seamlessly into society. He was a monster who had been hiding in plain sight, a silent predator operating under the terrifying illusion of normalcy. The killer who had vanished into the shadows had simply been walking among them all along, the true nightmare just beginning to reveal its face. The revelation of Bryan Patrick Miller's identity sent a wave of icy dread through the Phoenix community. How could a man capable of such grotesque violence have walked among them for so long, seemingly undetected? As police began to piece together Miller's life, a deeply unsettling picture emerged, one far more strange, dark, and mysterious than anyone could have imagined. Bryan Patrick Miller, in 2015, was 44 years old. He worked as a truck driver and lived a quiet, unassuming life, a chilling contrast to the unimaginable horrors he had committed almost 2 decades prior. He had even been working just a few miles from Melanie Bernas' family home for years. His past, however, offered disturbing glimpses into his future. As a teenager, he'd had brushes with the law for violence, including a brutal stabbing of a man in Seattle. These incidents, combined with his later actions, hinted at a deep-seated pathology that had simmered beneath a veneer of normalcy. But what truly cemented his terrifying legacy and earned him his chilling nickname was his unique and horrifying modus operandi. After brutally stabbing both Angela Brosso and Melanie Bernas, Miller had subjected their bodies to extreme post-mortem mutilation, including decapitation. This wasn't just random violence. It was ritualistic, driven by a deeply disturbed delusion. Miller, it was discovered, believed his victims were zombies. In his twisted reality, he wasn't committing murder, he was performing an act of cleansing, eliminating the undead. This grotesque belief system, born from a mind detached from reality, transformed his victims into mere objects in his horrific fantasy, allowing him to commit unspeakable acts without a shred of remorse. The psychological profile that began to take shape was that of an individual with an extreme fascination with gore and violence, utterly devoid of empathy for his victims. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated, detached act of depravity, fueled by a terrifying delusion that allowed him to compartmentalize his monstrous deeds from his seemingly normal daily life. Armed with overwhelming DNA evidence linking him directly to both crime scenes, and now with a horrifying insight into his unique pathology, police moved in. On January 13, 2015, Bryan Patrick Miller, the zombie hunter, was finally apprehended. The arrest was swift, precise, ending nearly 20 years of freedom for a killer who had vanished into the shadows, only to re-emerge as a shocking testament to the monsters that can hide in plain sight. The capture brought a profound sense of relief, but also a chilling realization. The world contained evils far more bizarre and unsettling than most could ever conceive. With Bryan Patrick Miller finally in custody, the expectation for swift justice was immense, particularly from the families who had endured nearly 2 decades of agonizing uncertainty. However, the legal road to holding the zombie hunter accountable would prove to be as complex and twisted as his own mind. The pretrial phase was protracted, stretching for years. Given the unique nature of Miller's alleged delusions and the extreme brutality of the crimes, extensive psychiatric evaluations were conducted to determine his competency to stand trial. Legal maneuvers, hearings, and evidence disclosures dragged on, a testament to the meticulous process required to prosecute a case so cold and so profoundly disturbing. When the trial finally began, the prosecution's case was overwhelming and chillingly precise. At its core was the irrefutable DNA evidence, a direct, undeniable link between Bryan Patrick Miller and the crime scenes of both Angela Brosso and Melanie Bernas. This genetic blueprint, extracted years after the fact, was the silent, irrefutable witness that spoke louder than any human testimony. They meticulously detailed the horrific similarities in the modus operandi of both murders, emphasizing the extreme, post-mortem mutilations that pointed to a single, deranged individual. They also presented circumstantial evidence, painting a picture of a man who, despite appearing normal, harbored terrifying thoughts and violent tendencies. Miller's defense, however, centered on a strategy as bizarre as the crimes themselves, an insanity plea. His lawyers argued that at the time of the murders, Miller was genuinely insane, firmly believing his victims were indeed zombies. They contended that he saw himself not as a killer, but as someone performing a twisted public service, cleansing the world of the undead. This defense aimed to prove that he lacked the mental capacity to understand the wrongfulness of his actions, a legal argument that, if successful, could have led to a psychiatric facility rather than prison. The state, however, forcefully countered this defense. Prosecutors argued that despite his delusions, Miller understood the criminal nature of his acts. They pointed to the meticulous way he committed the murders, the effort he put into covering his tracks, and his ability to evade capture for 2 decades, behaviors that suggested cunning and a clear intent to avoid consequences, not the chaotic actions of a truly insane individual. They sought to show that his zombie belief was a convenient, albeit grotesque, justification for unspeakable acts, not a complete break from reality that negated culpability. After nearly a month of testimony, the jury, grappling with the truly disturbing details and the complex legal arguments surrounding Miller's mental state, began their deliberations. The entire city of Phoenix, and indeed the nation, held its breath, awaiting the verdict that would finally bring a measure of closure to a nightmare that had lingered for over 2 decades. The long road to justice, paved with forensic breakthroughs and legal battles, was about to reach its climactic moment. After years of agonizing waiting, the families of Angela Brosso and Melanie Bernas finally received a measure of peace. On April 17, 2023, the jury delivered its verdict in the case against Bryan Patrick Miller, guilty on all counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Angela Brosso and Melanie Bernas. The zombie hunter, the phantom killer who had terrorized Phoenix and haunted their lives for nearly 2 decades, was finally held accountable. The relief was palpable, a heavy burden lifted after 30 long years of unanswered questions and unaddressed grief. For Angela's and Melanie's families, this verdict was more than just a legal outcome. It was the culmination of a tireless fight for justice. They had endured decades of not knowing, of fearing that the monster who took their daughters would never be found. Their victim impact statements in court painted a heartbreaking picture of the void left by their loved ones and the profound trauma inflicted by Miller's horrific acts. This was not just a victory for law enforcement and forensic science. It was a testament to the resilience and unwavering dedication of those who refused to let their loved ones be forgotten. The Bryan Patrick Miller case stands as a chilling study in the nature of pure evil and the terrifying ability of some individuals to hide their monstrous inner worlds from plain sight. How could a person, driven by such grotesque delusions, live a seemingly normal life for so long? What twisted psychology allows someone to believe they are performing a cleansing act while committing unspeakable atrocities? Miller's conviction forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the most dangerous individuals might not fit any stereotype. They could be anyone, quietly harboring their bizarre and deadly fantasies. This case also highlighted the transformative power of advanced DNA forensics and investigative genetic genealogy. Without these groundbreaking scientific tools, Bryan Patrick Miller might have remained the phantom killer forever, his crimes forever unsolved. His apprehension provided not only justice for his victims, but also hope for countless other cold cases across the nation, demonstrating that even the most elusive monsters can eventually be identified and brought to justice. Bryan Patrick Miller, the zombie hunter, is now behind bars, serving 2 life sentences without parole. His reign of terror is definitively over. Yet the shadows of his crimes and the unsettling questions they raise continue to linger. The memories of Angela Brosso and Melanie Bernas will forever be tied to the horrific acts committed against them. And for the community of Phoenix, the case serves as a stark, strange, dark, and mysterious reminder that true horror can lie dormant for decades, fueled by unspeakable delusions, a silent threat in plain sight, waiting to be unmasked.